I think we need to be really careful about focusing on the packaging and not the content. We see a lot of stuff at the moment around employee experience and people changing their job titles, and I think it's great. I think employee experience as a kind of movement could be really a real game changer for us. But sometimes I worry we rebrand at the expense of actually changing what we do. So yeah, I believe HR needs a fundamental rethink, not just tweaking our job titles, not just kind of operating at the margins of what we do, but a fundamental rethink. We hear a lot about putting the human back into human resources, even a question mark about whether we should even be called human resources. For me, it means really looking at what we do and relating it to how human beings think, feel, behave, are intrinsically motivated, communicate with one another. And I think when we do that, as HR professionals, it's very stark that so much of what we do does not relate to how human beings think, feel, behave. If we think about reward, so HR, we put huge amounts of effort into getting our bonus schemes right, getting the criteria, whether they should be against individual objectives versus divisional objectives, what's the kind of the bar that we want to set, what are the ratings, and so we put huge amounts of effort into that. But rarely do we actually question, does money motivate? And if we look at the research, then there's plenty of evidence to suggest that certainly as an incentive in the medium to long term, it doesn't work at all. So alternatives to that are what does actually make us feel good about the organisation we're working for, what does make us want to work that bit harder, what makes us feel valued and energised. And when you look at that, it's not the big bonus scheme net of tax 3 months after year end. It's actually small things that surprise and delight us, that are personal to who we are, that have had some thought put into it, that are regular, that are really about saying thank you rather than dangling a financial carrot. Another example would be learning. So the human brain can only take in so much. We can only change one behaviour at a time. What we do is we save up all of our feedback for the end of the year for performance reviews. We then put people on training programs. The human brain will forget 80% of what it's learned within 30 days of that training program. So we're seeing instead a recognition that we learn in bite-sized chunks much better, and we learn at a point where we need that information, where it's useful to us. So we're seeing just-in-time learning, micro-learning, self-managed learning, which is much more effective. So just a couple of examples there of if we think about how human beings think, feel, behave, are encouraged to perform better and work back from that rather than what is the accepted wisdom, best in class supposedly process, and implementing that for the organisation, then I think we start to get somewhere. So at the conference I'll be talking about our approach at Disruptive HR, which is based around the EACH model, employees as adults, consumers and human beings. The adult piece is about how in HR we can move away from the parenting that we've been doing, both the caring parent but also the critical parent, the kind of nursemaid and compliance officer, and instead look at how we can create the conditions where people can be much more agile, much more productive, perform better, much more innovative and creative, and that is where you have a much more adult-to-adult dynamic going on. The consumer piece in the EACH model is around HR moving away from one-size-fits-all processes and instead looking at how we can segment our markets more effectively, customise what we do, and personalise based around individual needs, preferences and so on. Because if we think about our employees like consumer organisations think about their customers, then it leads you to very different conclusions. And finally, the human piece I touched on earlier. The human piece is really understanding how human beings function, perform, behave, and making what we do much more human-centred rather than process-driven. So instead of designing processes based around not trusting managers to have conversations, to reward people, instead if we can look at putting the human at the heart of it, it leads us to very different answers, different solutions.